So Jack has a Mythic Plus manifesto. You know what Jack did? Jack actually had a crazy fucking good video, and I had never seen it, and it was during the race, I guess. And he got a lot of positive feedback on it, I think, but I just want to shout out a video I watched of him. Yeah, see, I did. I've seen like the first like minute of this, I guess. But no, where was this, dude? How world first Mythic Kaiveza was healed.
There's more stamina.
I think a lot of people don't really understand healing at a high level in this game. Like, why would you not just bring healers that do the most HPS? A lot of it, and especially this fight, was like playing very specific specs for single target healing and letting very specific rule. Like Paladin is better than Shaman on this fight, but it's like Evoker is just better at what Paladin is doing, and Shaman does something different that we needed, and like that's why we made that swap. And a lot of people don't understand that, and he really broke it down well in this video. I watched almost all of it. And you can see in the comments, they're like, dude, awesome analysis, amazing video. And I think the healer community, or the amount of people that watch this, which it got a pretty good amount of views, it was like really helpful to know like how healing is done at this level and why, which was really good. I'd listen to healers about Mythic Plus if two of them could ever agree on anything about it. I think it's like the whole Mythic Plus community, honestly. Like, I don't even think it's their fault, but like they just like, they've had all these like changes that they haven't liked over the last few years, and most of it, now that we know, like Blizzard didn't even like high Mythic Plus players, like Blizzard never thought about them one time, but like I feel like they deep dived every change that was made thinking it was aimed at them, and I think that just drove them crazy. And now like I don't think it's possible for the Mythic Plus community to have like a normal response to anything getting released. They just have to like go through the motions of like absolutely melting down, and then they like think about it a little more, and then I mean that's probably like most WoW people, but like the Mythic Plus community is so, they just have like little brother syndrome, you know. They feel like they're disregarded in place of raid, and they have to like fight for everything they have, so they're like super loud, and like every change is so important. Like another thing is like they ask for kiss curse affix, not everyone, but like people are like, let's do kiss curse affixes, and now they come out and people are like, oh well, we wanted no affixes, and well wait, when the affixes are totally gone, and it's just like no one actually, there's just so much opinions coming from different directions. Like Blizzard just has to like cook on the mode themselves and make it better. We talk about that a little bit on the potty. You know what? Let's watch this Jack video.
Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack. Going into the War Within, they made really big changes to Mythic Plus, and Challenger's Peril being one of them. I think they really have missed the mark in terms of what they're actually kind of doing to the player base in the process.
Wait, with the change? Or I think he means like when they introduced Challenger's Peril in the first place. I'm with him there. The change was... I've heard a lot of weird takes about the change. So like it should have been this. They're basically, the most reasonable arguments are like they could have done this and it would have been better, and they're like suggesting a different change, but I don't think anyone's suggesting that like them doing this change was actively bad. Like I think Dorky tried to get around to saying some shit like that on the podcast, and both Dratnos and I, or maybe it was the bonus episode, but Dratnos and I were both like what? It was some weird shit. I don't know. You could tell that like he had talked about it with his chat a lot, I think, and they like convinced themselves that this was actually bad, which this is just objectively better for like anyone doing Mythic Plus than what it was previously. Not to say that they couldn't like completely remove Challenger's Peril or change it slightly differently. This is definitely a W, right? Just a lot of people are timing keys more often. The retroactive thing was also super interesting. I don't know if you guys noticed it when they changed this, but like you would have logged in with more score, because any key that you would have timed with 90 more seconds like automatically got counted as timed, like retroactively. But at the same time, if you didn't time a 10 previously, but then you did retroactively, you actually didn't get the portal. You had to like go back in and do it. It's kind of weird.
In Dragonflight, there were a lot of times, especially...
What is it? It'd be better if they were free deaths instead of the timer change, but I imagine there are programming challenges there. Yeah, so I think you're right. Like, I imagine that's just a harder change to implement. Like, just increasing the timer is probably piss, right? Like, that's just super easy to handle. Relatively. That just sounds that way. I don't really know how hard that would be. Like, specifically, the first deaths don't matter, or like one death per player doesn't count against the timer. But like, how would that even be better? Like Dorky was saying like, oh yeah, well yeah, it spots you free deaths unless no one dies, but if no one dies, then like the key timers are easy, so you naturally get pushed to a higher level that's harder. And it's like, that's a high key only problem. Like the only time that argument would ever be relevant is if the reason you're not timing keys is you're having 0 deaths and you couldn't make it, which doesn't affect anyone on a 10 literally ever, right? Like you're not timing an 8 or a 10 because of deaths, not because everyone lived all the way through and you were just slow. Like that's just not real. It's like way, or maybe it's very uncommon. Like at a high, like it's mostly high keys where that's the thing, but I mean, it's like an infinitely scaling system, like putting you into the next key level. There's a whole other conversation, and we did end up having this where it's like, yeah, it still just feels bad. Like the level where you feel like everything one-shots you and the level that's hard to do damage to time it doesn't add up like it did before Dragonflight. And like that's an entirely different conversation, but like specifically the way that they changed this thing, I don't think it doesn't matter really how they do it.
Season 3 and Season 4, running with some of the Exodia comps that you had there, you could really like steamroll keys up into pretty high levels without really respecting a lot of the dungeon mechanic. And so, as they even write right here, they want challengers Peril to emphasize precise play and greater risk on player decisions as they progress through higher keystone levels. So they say, hey, we want to give you some breathing room, you know, not make it as punishing, but we still want this initial goal of precise play come into effect. Now, the issue is that,
I'll let him finish.
in Dragonflight, you didn't have this penalty and you could rack up like 20-something deaths in certain dungeons and still time it, which felt really weird for a timed event.
True.
Especially with runbacks involved as well. A lot of people really enjoyed being able to kind of like steamroll keys up until they got into a high level. The problem was that you would have a really huge mix of players where you didn't really understand this person with this IO or this person with the same IO actually knew the dungeon mechanics. And so what they've in the War Within is like big wall, especially at 12s, where the health, the damage are all really high.
I don't even know if the wall, like most people don't even encounter the wall. Like if you're even, he's referring to the wall as a 12 of like the big jump in difficulty. The thing is like, you already know what kind of player you are and you know what your goals are if you ever attempt a 12 for any reason whatsoever, right? Like attempting a 12 is such a deliberate, like I'm pushing for high key score, maybe for title at the end of the season, or like I'm trying to play the game a little bit. Like no person who does Mythic Plus just for the portals or just for their weekly keys, and it's not like Mythic Plus is their main thing. And this is true statistically too. You can see this has been the case for years, especially since they've added the portals. Like almost all 98% of people never even go above the portal level. So like those people are not attempting 12s. Like when you're attempting a 12, you're trying to do some high level shit, right? Which is admirable. Love that shit, right? But like that doesn't happen accidentally to someone who's trying to get their weekly keys done. Like it's obvious what you're trying to do if you do that, right? I wonder what he's gonna come away with this and say.
Which mainly, so what they've built in the War Within is like this big wall, especially at 12s, where the health, the damage are all really high, which makes the players have to be even better at their classes, even better at their specs, really in order to make it over this wall, in order to really progress. But because of the infinite nature of spamming Mythic Plus, where as long as you can find a keystone, you can just keep on playing the game, you don't really have that improvement that Blizzard's trying to force upon the player base. You kind of just have people smashing face into the dungeons, and as players continue to improve, they also get a lot more exclusive. Way back
I don't know if I'm really
in
following.
Legion, when Mythic Plus first came around,
Maybe he'll
on
pull
NA,
it together
there was
here.
a pretty vibrant Discord community that was really looking to like get people together to start doing Mythic Plus Dungeon. And then over time, that community basically just fell apart because people started getting more and more exclusive. Before the 0.1% title really came along, people realized that there was, you know, a handful of the total player base that they could progress into the highest dungeons. And so it became more about getting onto people's friends lists and getting into that networking to find those elite groups to continue sort of progressing. Now, that kind of got broken up into a bunch of different tiers, not just in the 0.1%, but also in like the 1%, where people would very rarely want to like pug somebody. They'd very rarely want to pug somebody, only kind of play with their friends, and more people started kind of shifting to that over time. This is kind of...
What is it? I think he may be pointing out that players will naturally end up at a plus 10 and up, but just sheer force, not by playing well. Interesting, isn't it? I feel like getting to a 10... Maybe this isn't true. We actually kind of talked about this on the podcast recently, but okay. Do you think that doing a 10 this season is the hardest a 10 has ever been? So they have like the increased dungeon mechanics, right? Stuff like does more damage. Okay, a few no's, mostly yeses. On season start, yeah. I've kind of heard... I haven't really heard a lot of arguments against that. Like, it kind of seems like they've amped up the amount of mechanics. They've changed the key scaling system. I guess it's interesting because when you're doing a 10, you don't have... When you're doing a 10, you don't have, like, sanguine and bolstering and shit. But 15 second for deaths is, like, maybe one of the most punishing things ever for most people who are just trying to get the 10 done the one time. Not to mention that it's is it the first season we're doing? Is this the hardest the key level has been to get the highest loot from your vault as well? So like you have to do a 10 to get mythic track loot. Has it been a 10 in previous seasons to get the best mythic plus loot, or could you have done like a 9, right? It was a plus, was an 8 or so? Like I think 10 still gave you like a higher, what I'm asking is like when the beginning of the mythic track started on the weekly vault. I know like 10s I think gave a higher eye level one, but it was still on the same track. It was 8. So like it's an 8 plus there's a 15-second death timer, plus I think this seems true is like objectively the dungeons are just kind of harder because like it just seems like there's more going on and you can't use stops to stop everything, so you're relying on individual players' kicks. If you go lower down the key levels, that's what people really struggle with. So I don't know, it kind of logically makes sense that this would be the hardest that 10s have been, and also by far the hardest the weekly farm get the best gear in the game keys have been, right? So I could see that kind of having a big impact, because like players that normally maybe even didn't go for the portals now feel like they have to because they just need the gear in general. First time having Tyrant and Fort in the same key as well. Yeah, true. Pepega phone. Doing 20s were totally optional back then. Well, they weren't optional if you wanted the portals, and like I think the portals are like something that the casual community really fucking like. They love the fucking portals. It's honestly a really cool reward. But yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't know. It's a checklist thing. Like you've played WoW for a really long time, and a checklist that you have is, am I like getting the best loot out of the vault I can? Am I mythic rating? No. Well, I can still get mythic track loot if I do some 10s. And you kind of just like weekly no-levered them before, but now, and you did less than 10s before, but now you have to do 10s, which have Fort and Tyrant and a 15-second death timer, and there's more mechanics in the dungeons. Like, it's kind of a perfect storm of absolutely slaughtering people, right? It's not surprising. A lot of people have an AOTC plus portals internal checklist. Yeah. I want to let Jack finish up this thought. I'm going to rewind it a little bit.
A bunch of different tiers, not just in the 0.1%, but also in like the 1%, where people would very rarely want to like pug somebody. They'd very rarely want to pug somebody, only kind of play with their friends, and more people started kind of shifting to that over time. This is kind of what's happening right now in the War Within Season 1, from what I've seen, is that dungeons over 12 are having not huge amounts of people looking around in groups in LFG, and you're having a lot of players really just getting like slammed at that 12 level, and it might change a little bit thanks to this Challenger's Peril affix, but I think a lot of people get like really hard gated at the 12 because of the jump up in difficulty and the fact that the game.
I just want to stop him right there. So I think there's been less people doing Mythic Plus in general. That could be the death timer thing. That could be the increased mechanics. But also when you're specifically talking about people doing above 12s, do you think the community is majorly different from people who are doing above 12s now versus people who are doing like 22s through 25s last expansion before they made the change in Season 4? Because both of those scenarios require someone to make the active decision of, I'm doing keys because I want to do high keys, and I'm no longer doing keys for the rewards from it. That hasn't changed at all, right? It's the same thing. So you're basically just saying the high key community is just smaller than it was before, because that decision is exactly the same. Or you're saying that like before, maybe it was a little easier to do your 20s and get your portals, but then maybe you do some 21s with the boys, and no, you've done 21s now. Maybe you do 22s, but maybe like the jump at 12 is so big that like that just completely stops those people. I've always just assumed that if you're trying to do 25 pluses, you just know that from the beginning of the season, and like that's your goal, and those people kind of like are already set, you know? Like, I don't think a lot of people randomly wander into, like, what 22s, 23s, and 24s used to be after they got their portals. Or if they did, they had a goal in mind of, like, getting title. Or, like, they love Mythic Plussing, so they just want a Mythic Plus all the time. But, like, those people would probably still be doing that now because it's purely based on the gameplay they love, which is still there. And that title is still there, right? I guess maybe there's, like, I'm missing a group of people. Like, I assume there's a lot of the low-level people, which there might be a bunch of different categories within there, and then there's people who are doing 10s for vault loot, and then there's people who are doing 10s for portals, and that's their goal. They get AOTC and they're kind of done with the content for the patch. They know their limits. That's fine. And then I see like another group of people that are planning on going above 12 because they like doing high keys. And maybe I'm missing a group in between the 10s for portals and people with high keys as an aspiration. That sounds like what is happening if there's any less people going above 12 than there was that used to go above a 22, because it should be the same. It should be the same. Okay, correct. I am that group at maximum. Okay, that's perfect. Can you tell me why it's big tone? So if you're that group of people, explain, like, advocate and tell me why you do what you do. Like, A person doing 10s goes for vaults and portals. A person who wants to do high keys is going to just do high keys. You're the group in between that. Tell me what your motivation is to do a key above a 10 after you have portals and all the gear you want. Like, what is the reward? Why are you doing it? I'm just trying to like understand. IO. But isn't that the same motivation as the high key group people? It's no different. That's why I'm trying to understand the difference. Just for fun. But I think that's also the high key people, or maybe it ends up turning into that. I think that's why those people do it, for fun and for IO. There's no different. Maybe it's like, I want to do 11s and 12s so I get higher. There's a group of people who like doing 10s quickly for loot on the reset, so they do 11s and 12s to get higher IO so they get invited quicker to 10s. I can see that. That's a motivation that actually makes sense to me. Okay, he responded. I want a challenge to enjoy, and I do 12s or so. Like back then, I liked being able to play at 20, 21, 22, but I didn't want to go nuts chasing title. I just wanted generally harder content, and it no longer feels like there's a ramp in difficulty to do so, and it's a brick wall. Okay, so that makes perfect sense, what you just said. So that is, and I feel like there's probably a lot of people that would agree with that. Okay, that makes sense. So there is a group that in between high keys and just doing 10s, and it's basically just going for a challenge that is challenging for you, and you just like doing that, but now you feel like that challenge doesn't exist because once you're at an 11, it's just like there's no fucking point in doing a 12 because it jumps so much. True. I mean, then you have to ask like why Blizzard even thinks that doing why is there a massive jump at 12? I guess it was to like clearly define the high keys and the low keys, but it's also probably ruining the chance that anyone could ever get into high keys in the first place because of the wall, you know? Who knows? It's okay, let's see what Jack says.
Game doesn't really teach you how to get better. There's three main factors that you really have to balance in dungeons over 12s. Doing enough damage, especially with the tank nerfs that were kind of put in this expansion. Tanks don't live forever. They have incredible tankiness. But, you know, when I play with VDH, there's times where if the pack doesn't die in X amount of time as we're trying to do a pull,
just run out.
that he will just melt, right?
Yeah.
Or he has to be forced to kite or something along those lines. The damage checks get really high, especially as you start ramping up in keys over 12. The healing check ramp up very quickly, as I'm sure a lot of you have noticed from our channel, especially when you're pugging in casts go through. And the third factor is the crowd control element. And so all of these things really get pushed upon you as you go into higher level dungeons. And I would argue, since the War Within has put together, or actually Dragonflight to be honest, has put together all these talent nodes, we have more abilities really than ever before that we have to take advantage of. You have things like kick, obviously, but it used to be that healers didn't actually have kick. You know, you have all of the crowd control, thunderstorms, stuns. You have a variety.
Oh yeah, it's so hard to be a shaman. Oh, you have so many useful buttons you could press. That sucks.
That you have to
oh man, that
master.
sucks.
And a lot of these are not new, but having all of these
kidding.
together is also having Blizzard balance around having all of these things. For example, I know this
You
is
can't.
HPS logs.
It's so funny. Like the Resto Shaman situation this season shows you more than anything how much they have internally changed dungeons. Resto Shamans, as far as I know, don't have fucking anything different that they didn't have last season or the season before in Dragonflight. Like maybe there's like a cool new talent or something, but that's not why they're meta. Like the people they describe why they're meta, like, oh, Curse Dispel, Poison Cleansing Totem, the amount of stops, they have a stun, they have a knock, they have a really short cooldown kick. They had all of that in the past. The only thing that has changed is what the dungeons require, which has made that feel like a necessity, which has just not been the case before. And that is fascinating in my opinion, because like usually the healer meta is determined by like new cool things this healer has or their tuning level. But that's not even what this is. They have a raid buff now. Bro, I don't think that is what massively pushed them over the edge this much. It's a great raid buff and they didn't have one before, but like, I don't know, there's really good raid buffs that aren't in the top group right now, right? Like, I think clearly it's the amount of buttons they have and the ability to deal with what Blizzard has posed with you as a problem. So like, it's just the new Kiss Curse affixes, which doesn't really exist on high keys, but it's that stuff. And then it's, they just like have too many kicks and stops and they've just made kicks and stops so much more important. But people are running Enhance and Resto. Yeah, which kind of shows you that it's not really about the raid buff, right? It's about the other shit.
Range is really what I want to highlight.
It's also just two really
for
good
some of these
classes.
Warcraft log statistics is that, you know, you'll see
It's also that the things that Shaman bring that are super important isn't something that you don't get by bringing another one. It's kind of like why Evokers are super good in Raid, right? Anytime you can find a way to bring another Evoker, you're bringing another Zephyr, Rescue, you know, you're another time spiral, maybe a spatial paradox. Like, you're just bringing more value than other people bring past the initial raid buff that they provide. Shamans are kind of like that in Mythic Plus. Like, you bring a second shaman, yeah, you're not getting Sky Fury or whatever, but you just get infinite buttons per shaman. That just makes the dungeon easier.
Like Disc Priest have incredibly
and
wide
both of them
ranges.
are just really
Things
strong.
like Totemic Shaman have widely been viewed as easier to play, so they have a little bit of a smaller range. But we never really get data to show the range with which people use their kicks, their stuns, their interrupts, their defensives. There's not these statistics on these things.
Well,
but it really only takes...
There literally are statistics if people log them, but there's just not normal to like log Mythic Plus runs, especially in lower keys. Like, I don't know. What percentage of keys under a 7 do you think are logged and uploaded to Warcraft logs? It's got to be like insanely fucking low, right? Like, who does that? It's probably not 1%. It's probably a little higher than that, but it's not a lot. So that information isn't really there. I wonder if Blizzard has that information. They do have other ways of getting information than just logs, even though it seems like this expansion they've almost exclusively changed things because of public logs. But they do have like other ways of tuning and like seeing stuff like that. I bet they can see the amount of like something that wouldn't surprise me from what I've seen that they have is like maybe they can just view the amount of kicks that happen on an average +7 versus like a +13 or something. Not like how many casts are going off, like how many times are people casting interrupts. They can like query that, some shit like that, which would be very interesting if more runs were logged for sure.
You pugging a couple of times to realize that there is an incredibly massive delta between people who are using those abilities and people who are not. And since Blizzard designs the game around them regardless, you can have some enormously frustrating experience.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like Anduin. Like, Anduin was a fight that wasn't super hard for the high-level guilds, because the higher you go into a guild ranking, the more likely assignments and like stuns and kicks, that is something that is done at a really high level. Like, if you go down the guild skill level ladder, you'll actually still see relatively good throughput compared to the top teams, but the thing that totally stands out is their ability to be consistent with like kick and stop assignments. Like, that is something that is, you've done it a million times, it's ingrained in what you do. So like, Anduin absolutely slaughtered guilds. And there were guilds that were taking 3 times the amount of pulls on Anduin than happened for World First, which is a really rare statistic that almost never, ever happens on any boss. It only happened on Anduin because it specifically had so many kick requirements and stop requirements. If you missed a kick in P2, your group instantly died. If you didn't kill all the ads downstairs, your group instantly died. If you didn't perfectly stop all of their stuns, like the little souls casting that little 8-second cast or whatever, if you didn't perfectly stop those every time, you instantly died. If you didn't kill the ad before the cast went off in the intermission, instantly died. There's so many little small checks, and that is so hard compared to like just pure throughput, which is what most fights require of you, really, outside of like some basic positioning. And Mythic Plus is kind of like that, right? Like, they have made Mythic Plus more like the challenges that Anduin gave you than they used to be. Like, no matter what the key level is, yeah, okay, well, we need to keep making keys require more because gamers are getting better. It is true, like, as much as people would agree that I bet if they went back with like Legion style dungeons where just like less was happening and you could just kind of pull everything, I actually think people wouldn't feel challenged enough. I think people want less of a challenge from the pure mechanical things than they do now, for sure. But I also think if you were to scale that back and remove almost all of the challenge from it, I do think that would be a sticking point, just in my opinion. We're not going to really know because they'll probably never do that. But so they are increasing with time because players are just getting better. More people do Mythic Plus. And I think they definitely overstepped this patch from what I can tell. And if you're doing it because high key players are capable of doing it and you hated how much they did stops, do you know how many less stops happen on like a +7 than like a +14? Like, if you go into a Pug 8 right now, people are not fucking doing stop rotations on these ads. Like, basically all of these casts are going off. And I mean, it kind of brings me back to that thing I've talked about a lot. I wonder how many mechanics Blizzard actually wants you to deal with. It's almost impossible to know, because if you're in a really good group, you can make none of them happen most of the time. Like, sometimes there's like uninterruptible shit. And if you're in a really not very invested group or like a lower group, like everything goes off. So you're not able to curate an exact experience of what you want your players to go through. Like raid bosses, except for very recently where you could use a PvP item to bug them out, raid bosses do mechanics, and almost always you cannot just make the boss not do the mechanic. Like, they are designing experiences that are dealt with, and every guild that kills the boss does the same thing. But like in dungeons, I don't even know what Blizzard expects a dungeon pack to feel like. I imagine they don't want it to feel like they're all the same and you just stop everything from happening. They probably want every pack to slightly have different mechanics. Like, I think it'd be fascinating to make a dungeon just once, just for science, and just make nothing able to be stopped or kicked at all. It would be kind of weird. You have a lot of buttons to stop. It'd be weird you weren't using them, and you have interrupt buttons, and it'd be weird that you weren't using it. But it would be interesting to know from that experiment, what does Blizzard actually want you to deal with? If they could curate a dungeon experience and you could actually see that you don't have to guess and say, oh, in low keys, every single one of these mechanics is happening, and in high keys, none of them are happening. Like, how much do you actually want to happen? Like, what do you think a dungeon pack should look like? And until they do that, it's just so interesting because, like, every pack just does infinite stuff for some people and some people only. And probably the people it matters the most for are the people going for 10s. It's 98% of players, and I think those are the people who struggle with it the most. But I don't know. We also talked about on the podcast recently of, like, could you make people, like, doing defensives? Could you, like, reward people for using defensives well so, like, people get better at it? Dude, one idea we came up with that people would absolutely hate, but it would make people better, is, like, having certain mechanics in the dungeon if you don't use a personal for them. And it's mechanics that they're not happening every 10 seconds. They happen, let's just say there's like one boss has one cast where you need to have some kind of mitigation for, and like another boss has that, and there's like one mini boss trash pack that has it. And every time you get hit with it without using a personal, it would give you a damage down. You do X% less damage for the next 10 seconds. Now, you're hearing this and you're like, no, this is so fucking bad. And I think people would hate it. But I think after like a couple runs of it, people just care about their overall damage at the end of the dungeon and their damage they do on the packs. People would actually really fucking make sure they had a mitigation personal for those. It's Final Fantasy does this. Final Fantasy, very different game in Final Fantasy, but it is a concept from that. People do really care about damage. So, like, if people are just mongoing damage, you better fucking believe they'd start thinking about where they're using their personals if they had to. And that would help so much for healing and just making people better. Because the game is kind of telling you what mechanics you should have personals for, and they can design the game that way. Obviously, you would need to make it not happen enough to where certain classes can't actually get rid of everyone, but it would encourage better play, and it's a way to reward you. Because we thought about it on the podcast, like, other ways to get around it. It's like, oh, well, maybe you could give someone some kind of damage increase for how much damage they absorbed with their, like, how much damage they reduced during the cooldown. First of all, I think that'd be really hard to do, but also it's just like vengeance all over again. So you'd have players just like pop all their personals and then just like sit in fire, and that has like so many problems. But like, there's almost no issue with the damage downs if they create it well. And it would make people actively think about their defensives better than just like mongoing the dungeon.
Just like in our previous videos where we've talked about the problems with healing in Dragonflight being based off of having so many defensives that you basically have to have a defensive up for every major mechanic in order to survive, so too is the game being designed around all of the additional crowd control that continues to get added over time. Having more resources than ever to unlock all these abilities also means that Blizzard wants to challenge players and make it so that they have to use every single ability in order to make sure you're having more successful runs, or just about, or having like almost all of the people taking advantage of those things. And what you really have noticed over time is that there's not a really good way for the game to teach people how to utilize these mechanics. For example, we had like the Exiles Reach as new players are sort of getting into the game, but since it's not involved in
I want to stop them there a little bit too. I'm like watching this pack and I'm looking at these casts, and like a couple of them went off. I think they could, they did something this expansion, right? They made stops less powerful against certain things, which did a few things, mostly negative. But what it did do is it put a lot of more power in your actual interrupt spells, counterspell, kick, spearhand, strike, or whatever, the actual kick spells. And I wonder if they could do a little bit more with, and this would help lower level play. Like, you know how like there's usually like these little nodes right here, and the idea is like, oh, well, if you're kicking a lot, you can use this point and like it'll give you some runic power and it'll reduce your cooldown. And if you're doing like warriors, it'll increase your damage against the target. And shamans have a super fucking broken one. It's like, bro, what is the shaman one again? It's actually so OP. Unless they changed it with the patch. Maybe they did. But the shaman one is like when you kick a certain spell school, you get a DR from it. Interrupting a spell with wind shear decreases your damage taken from that spell school by 15% for 18 seconds, stacking up to 2 times. That is so fucking good. That is so good. But I wish they did more of this, and I wish it wasn't talents. I just wish, in general, every class in the game that had a kick, get mad healer priests, got a benefit that people actually cared about, And I think the result of that would be people in dungeons are like, maybe the worst case scenario of this is people are all trying to snipe the same kick from each other because those bonuses are really powerful. But honestly, that's a really fucking good problem to have. Like, I feel like that problem in a lower key, having the problem of people interrupting too much is like so much fucking better than what is happening right now, right? So I don't know. I think that's something to be fucked around with. Like, I actually think that would help a lot in the game.
Is that there's not a really good way for the game to teach people how to utilize these.
What is it? If you hit your kick and it doesn't interrupt something, it shouldn't go on CD. I thought about that as well. It can't get its full cooldown rewarded because then you would just macro it into every spell and that would be like super degenerate. But I actually do think something like if your kick doesn't actually interrupt something, I think it going on half cooldown instead of full cooldown is just good. I think that would actually be really good.
For example, we'd like the Exile's Reach as new players are sort of getting into the game, but since it's not involved in endgame content, a lot of people were just kind of...
What is it? I think that just leads to everyone setting their kick on the first cast, and then you miss kicks on everything else for the next 10 seconds. That's possible. I think that is an infinitely better problem to have than the one right now where no one's using it ever in lower keys. I think the success chance on interrupt things killing you would be a lot higher in that scenario.
Skipping ahead, boosting
ahead. It will break PvP. Make it not work in PvP.
And then just progressing on.
They have the ability to do that.
The regular game.
PvE and PvP are totally fucking different. Why wouldn't you be able to do that?
I'd also argue since delves have existed, they've sort of made a progression path more focused towards casual players, and the Mythic Plus and like raid environments are really focused towards what I would call competitive players. I think in general, a lot of casual players are going to play the game a lot. They might even play as much as competitive Mythic Plus or competitive raid players might. Their emphasis is going to be not so much on let me push out as much damage, as much healing, as much whatever. They still want to improve their gear, but there's a different mindset that they have going on. And as a result, since you kind of diverge those player bases a little bit more when it comes to gear progression, in my opinion, it seems like the changes they've been making to Mythic Plus has been that they feel more comfortable adding on more difficulty into these dungeons, just like how the raid devs are consistently making raids more challenging. And I think Nerevar Palace is a really good example of how the raids have gotten steadily more difficult over time. So while we're well into the season right...
That's true, and that kind of happens in games, but the Nerevar Palace thing is... I think 2 tiers in a row, they've just really fucked up the feeling of like a wall. Like the Laridar and Naimu and Smolderon being too easy for their spot in the raid, and then Tindral just... The wrong guilds were at Tindral at the wrong time because the bosses before were not difficult enough linearly. And the exact same thing happened this tier. Like, Brood Twister was too hard in general, for sure. But a big problem with Brood Twister was that Rashanan and Sikran were so easy that guilds that should not be on Brood Twister were on Brood Twister before they were supposed to, and that made it significantly harder. And that's something that's weird. That doesn't normally happen. That's not a common error. They don't do that a lot. But they've done it twice in a row, and I find that really interesting.
Right now, I think what we're really going to be looking for is how the difficulty of dungeons continues to sort of branch out. And one of the largest levels of difficulty is just finding a group to begin with that can press their buttons well. And I think the more that you're having the continued sort of bloat with lots of cooldowns, lots of crowd control, lots of defensives, the wider of a range of players that you're really going to be experiencing. And it's also going to start, I believe, turning people off to the game when they start feeling like their progression gets stopped. Now, you might have an entire wide range of
like the wall at 12 definitely matters. Like if you're someone who feels like you can go above an 11 and then the wall at 12 makes you not feel that, and you're kind of where you are, you've already gotten AOTC, maybe you're not in a mythic guild, you are going to just stop playing the game. Like the gear progression matters, and some people do play just for that. Some people do play just for collecting and stuff like that. But if you are you want all of that to happen simultaneously. That's when WoW is at its best, right? You don't want to be just playing the game to like do your weekly vaults and then just maybe you get a little stronger. You want to apply it to something, which is why people mythic rate or why people do higher keys. You want to apply that power you're getting to something and make it worth getting, right? That's the best case scenario. And like the 12, I am learning, especially in this video from talking to that guy earlier and some of you earlier, that you just feel like there's nothing to do in the game, you know?
Player base, and then you have a fraction of people who are doing
unable to do it
and up right now.
It's like that Rashanan Brood Twister wall exists in Mythic Plus. It's just a 12.
a little bit larger of a chunk here that's doing 12s, and then you kind of have like the rest of the player base. But what you forget is we're naturally...
I wish they would give something more for getting title. Yeah, they should give you like a fucking $1,000 stimulus check. If you get the Mythic Plus title, they should send you $1,000 American dollars.
Increasing an item level every single week, probably for the next like, month and a half, until people start getting close to BIS. And as a result, as people get closer to BIS, they're naturally going to progress further in towards 12s. But because the wall is going to be so high with doing 12s, the execution checks are going to be so high, it's going to be a real bear, I think, for a lot of players who want to have steady progression and to be able to continuously overcome things, which is a positive for having a slower gearing process. It's also going to be a negative if the wall itself is so large and the game doesn't do enough to really prepare you for what you're going to experience. Strong players, they're going to continue.
$1,000 Walmart gift card, because then no one will cash it. Yeah, it's fucking win-win for everybody. Blizzard's giving out $1,000, and because fuck Walmart, no one will even spend it. Let's fucking go. Save it for a rainy day.
Towards their friends list, look towards
when you
networking.
need some like one-ply toilet paper or something.
Less willing to take on unknown people, and for people trying to rise through the groups, well, there's just going to be less groups available doing those 12s, 13s, and onwards, in my opinion, than we've seen.
Max, why don't you make videos talking like this guy? I'm doing it right now. I'm doing that this instant. You mean like why don't I do some off-stream speak right into the camera type shit? I could. I don't know. It's just I don't like the flow as much as doing it on stream and it being less formal. Those videos would probably fucking pop off though if I actually did do that.
Obviously. That's probably my biggest concern, is that when they rise up with that difficulty, players are sort of adapting in a variety of different, and part of that is making sure you have
Jack's a pro. Yeah, he's like a really good caster.
Bringing in
I wouldn't be a good caster.
Becoming more exclusive, and that's really where you've seen a lot of the issue with the invite protests that we had a couple weeks ago, was that people didn't feel like they were getting invited. Now, part of that is definitely related to spec balance and how much damage specs do, where some specs are just absolutely crushing others. Naturally makes doing high keys significantly easier if you just kill off everything fast enough. You need less kicks, less defensives, all of that. But it also is going to be relating it. How willing are people to try new players out or try players out when, hey, this one person has significantly higher eye level? Okay, we're just going to be able to bring them in. We know what we're doing. Or people are just not going to be listing at all and then waiting for friends, waiting for network to be able to come on.
Max would be the Tony Romo of casters, calling out plays before they happen on a boss. That is not a WoW thing. I don't think I'd be good at casting most things, but let's just say there's some like alternate reality, or let's just say I like no longer am doing the Race to World first. I like fucking retire from that or something. I would be a fucking insane Race to World first caster. Like I'm pretty sure I would be like the very best at that. Not like someone calling out sponsors and shit. I don't know how to do that, but being like analytical about what's happening, I'm pretty sure I would be like the best person at that, just from my experience.
So as I've been,
but like I don't know. There's like there's a lot of skill to casting that I don't have, that I would have to figure out. But the actual like content of it would be really easy.
The issue is really that they've made these affixes going into the new expansion to be more punishing and to force more precise gameplay upon people before they're going to be able to progress. But the game itself doesn't do much to teach you how to use these resources effectively. The difference between using a damage reduction cooldown before a hit, after a hit, in preparation of that damage.
Dude, do you know that? Do you guys know that feeling? Everyone does this, but like the feeling of taking a ton of damage and then panic using a personal and then taking literally 0 damage during the duration of your personal being up. Oh man. That fucking sucks. I imagine if you're a healer and you see that, you actually get so tilted.
Very, very different, and you know that firsthand as a healer.
I mean, healers do it too.
The amount of kicks, stops, interrupts required, and teaching people about how direct interrupts really are working. Well, you need to use add-ons for these things. You need to use third-party resources.
And I'm mad. And I'm mad. Look at that. And we're talking about add-ons now.
Which of the mobs in 8 different dungeons
are
priorities.
Remove them from my game.
Downsides of what they do. And it's incredibly brutal. It's a huge skill check for people going into it. And the game doesn't really teach you those things. So what should they be doing instead? Well, I really think, especially when it comes to interrupts, that they should be removing that direct interrupt where you need to actually use a wind shear, use a kick in order to stop a volley cast.
Yeah, it does seem like a failed experiment.
And then you should be able to use those AoE crowd control abilities.
But I do like the idea of interrupts being important and players being incentivized to use them. And I think they already have the idea. It's just not in follow-up talents. It's just build it into the game, man. Make everyone feel like they want to get a kick when it happens. I think the worst case scenario is that everyone's just spamming kick because they just need it so bad, and maybe it shouldn't be that powerful, but I think there's a line in between those two things where people are just kind of naturally interrupting more, and it would help the entire game.
I think the crowd control has gotten really out of hand. The requirements have gotten really out of hand in dungeons, and the punishment is razor high when you're in these pug groups. You can't communicate all of these things unless you are in.
What is it? Yeah, but then in pug groups, you'll have everyone send kick on the first cast they see, and then what? Yeah, that's worst case scenario, but I don't know if you see that happen. Just like maybe you'll get used to the second and third cast of things not having kicks up, and then that's when you actually start stunning. Like right now, people don't really know when we're kicking or stopping, but that would actually kind of give you a blueprint to that. You just assume everyone's slamming their kicks instantly in that worst case scenario, so you know that if you do have any stops, that they're actually really important on the next cast.
A lot of players don't always want to get in voice, don't always want to communicate every single little thing that they're doing. They don't.
Sefus was in the game and people didn't all start fighting. Oh, such a good fucking point, by the way. Sefus was really good for almost every class in the game. When it was initially out, it was dog shit, but when they buffed Sefus, it was like, I think it might have been the best dungeon legendary for almost every class in the game, which is probably the most extreme version of what we're talking about, where you kick and get a massive benefit from it. And the opposite worst case scenario thing didn't happen. You didn't have everyone fucking fiending for every kick. At least I don't remember that. But also the game's become more high level since Legion, like a lot. Like people were very, very bad at Mythic Plus and Legion compared to now.
Organization, and it very quickly becomes needed as you're doing dungeons 12, sort of forcing it upon.
Max, imagine they take your one entire dungeon with uninterruptible mobs idea and then create a new Xalatath affix that selectively buffs mobs, but also makes them interruptible and gives you a buff for getting the kicks on them while it's alive. That's a bad idea. Blow up.
On people makes it a lot harder. I don't really.
That's
know
actually
why
kind of a
they
fine
don't
idea.
have an
I don't know why I
affix,
said that,
which is
but I don't know.
accelerating the cast of mobs. Now, hear me out. I know that sounds insane, but if you have a mob that has a cast time of 1.5 seconds, for example, why is it not like a 5-second cast at like keys below 6? And then at 6, it becomes what you would call the regular level of 1.5 seconds. Why do we not have like insanely slow casts in earlier level dungeons to give people time to see like, oh, that mob is casting. Oh, it might be lethal. Oh, I have to take time. Because really, as players are learning, their reaction times are slower. They're distracted by other things. They're still learning their specs. They're still understanding what's going on. Just having some beers and hanging out with friends.
Yeah, just drinking.
Why is
Fuck
that
it.
not actually allowing you to have a little bit more of an on-ramp? And they say, oh, okay, like, I don't know, past 6 or something. It's the regular sort of cast that they have
just
going
fucking
on.
get
Better
drunk,
alerts or information really in the game itself
get
to
drunk.
tell you about like the strengths or understanding of how you can use defense. Yeah, you could use a defensive like Astral Shift, which is a 40% damage reduction, but if you use it at a proper time, basically wasted, right? You know, you could mitigate half of a hit, or you can mitigate 1 or 2 dot ticks, but if you miss the rest of it, or you're already low health or something like that, it's really, really wasted. I think health in general needs to be a lot higher to give healers time to respond to what the burst damage is really doing to the dungeons. And I think we've already seen really big swings in overall healer output in just how you're playing one healer versus another. And that also plays a really big role in like how healer balance is going to work, what sort of agency that healers have to heal through mistakes and make up for those mistakes, that you can continue sort of progressing through those dungeons. I think what we have right now is a really like simple but brutal way of teaching people to play the game and to force upon them to get better. And for those who are not going to be as comfortable with it, or don't have the time or desire to be going through lots of third-party sites and research and understanding,
oh my god, I'm mad.
It's a freaking video.
Dude, when I hear third-party now, I just fucking my whole body quakes.
I don't think that they need to just
my whole body just
chop
fucking
it down to 5
violently
rotations
quakes
by any means. But you have to admit that WoW has gotten incredibly bloated with all of these resources.
Oh,
and when
there's so much bloat
around it.
Oh my god, defensive bloat. Oh my god, I'm mad. I'm mad.
Hey, this is just my opinion throughout this video, so let me know what you guys think about. Also, like, what challenges have you been experiencing throughout this Mythic Plus season? What I've really seen so far is it seems like there's less groups willing to start posting up in LFG as they start progressing in dungeons, and I think that it's only going to get more and more exclusive, especially at keys over 12s, to find groups and find that sort of community, which makes WoW a great game to play. And having so much coordination needed in dungeons more than ever before, I think also makes it even harder for new people to start getting into the game and understanding the game, and keep having new players coming into the system to keep it vibrant and fresh. Let me know what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching.
Vibrant and fresh. Fuck you, man. Come on. What are you saying right now? What are you? Come on. Oh, dude's foam rolling. Guys, we got a foam roll. We got a... I'll move chat so you can see it. We got a fucking foam roller right there. That is someone who is stretching. Love a good stretch.
To our
Let's
patrons,
fucking go.
All this content possible. If you'd like to join and get access to
Who
new
are those
videos,
people?
be sure to check it out in the description.
Who the
down
fuck
below.
are those people? Why did...
Aim and understand what you guys think. Thank you so much for watching, and huge love to our patrons who made...
Oh, you have a Patreon? What is his Patreon for? Let's check that out. What do I get for being a Jack Patreon sub? It's not here. You don't have a link to your... Oh, here it is. Automatic ads. So, and it's so bright. And it's just the brightest thing ever. Creating the next level of World of Warcraft healer content. For a cleric, you get access to all previous tier rewards. That's the first tier, buddy. Your name or character name at the end of every video is a special thank you. Okay, parasocial shit. Thank you so much for the support. Okay, so give me $5 for fucking nothing. Oh, you get Discord access. That's hype. Early access to new videos. Okay, that actually works. That's $15 a month. Higher contributor recognition. Extra parasocial. Receive healer coaching. Oh, that's actually hype. Receiving healer coaching by submitting your VODs or logs monthly. That is fucking worth. That is worth as fuck. Early access to write-ups. So many people could use help on that. Early access to write-ups. Okay, so tier 2 is worth it. And then tier 3. Why is Max dissing? I'm not dissing, Jack. I'm just fucking talking. And the $25 being a bishop. This is the most popular. Okay, so he's made a good Patreon because the most popular one is the one where you give him the most money. Access to all previous tier rewards. Exclusive coaching channel. Get access to my exclusive coaching channel on my Discord where you get priority access to any and all questions. Damn, that's crazy because like most people charge $50 for like a coaching session, but it sounds like he's doing it for $20. Or maybe they're just not asking for it all the time or something to where that's worth it because that would be like so time consuming. Like, that's pretty value, honestly. If you're a Patreon, that's probably good value. That includes at least one VOD log and UI review a month. That's a lot of work, actually. I would never do that. Thank you so much. Okay, W. All right, makes sense. Makes sense. Patreons are pretty good. I don't even know what I would include in my Patreon. My Patreon would be so shallow and self-serving. It would just be like, there's a $5 tier and you get absolutely nothing. You can just support me more. That would be sweet. And then like, there's no more tiers. That's my Patreon. I'll put your fucking name at the end of my video or something. I don't know. Do people care about that? Do people like when you see the name at the end of the video, does that like fucking just get you going, you know? Like, that would get me going, dude. Holy fuck. I'd be like, oh my God, that's me. Holy fuck. Move your chat? No. Oh, wait. Why is my chat in the middle of my screen? That is good. That is good. That is good.